What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Dodger Heads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Medium Large Sports Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Lance Brozdowski, pitching analyst extraordinaire, a guy who's been on our show a bunch, who I couldn't wait to get back on after some of the things the Dodgers have done this offseason. Lance, I know you're recently back from the winter meetings and enjoying, I hope, a couple months of slow moving before a baseball season gets going.
Yeah, for sure. This last week with the winter meetings and then going to Wake Forest was definitely like my social battery got drained a little bit. But I'm feeling it's ticking back up right in time for Christmas and everything. So it's good to see you, man.
Love it. Well, part of the reason that prompted me to reach back out to you is you posted a video that said, please stop paying relievers. And then about 3 days later, for the second offseason in a row, the Dodgers paid a reliever. Now, I will give you credit. You also predicted in that video that Edwin Diaz would go to the Dodgers. So let's start there. I want to ask about Tanner Scott. I want to ask about Roki Sasaki, but let's start with Edwin Diaz. Nobody seemed to see this coming. You were at the winter meetings when it all went down. I would love to just hear, what was the buzz when news broke that the Dodgers had in fact signed Edwin Diaz?
Well, very inside baseball here, but Scott Boras talks at every winter meetings, and it's this whole hullabaloo. He does it right outside the media workroom, and there's like 200 people that all glob around him. I intentionally try to avoid it all the time because it's just like there's no point unless you're there early and like in the scrum. But during that 25 minutes that he spoke, give or take, we had two of the major signings break. It was first Kyle Schwarber and then Edwin Diaz. And I joked that like both Wasserman, who represents Diaz, and Excel, that represents Schwarber, were like intentionally doing this to kind of like take a jab at Scott Boras. So the reaction was like a lot of people didn't know probably until that Scott Boras interview finished, and then the masses of people kind of dissipated and stuff. But it was kind of funny. But I was a bit surprised the dollar value wasn't substantially higher, or that he didn't get an extra year. The Dodgers are just on these guys. Like, I think for the Dodgers, they are more willing to assume in-season risk on the potential that a guy late in the postseason can impact them probably more than any other reliever in the market can. I think a lot of other teams are like more rational in how they think about things, but the Dodgers are clearly playing for the postseason, and that gives them an advantage on a lot of these guys. They're just willing to continually match and probably beat other offers that are in the industry on the best arms.
Yeah, I like Devin Williams as a guy that the Dodgers may have targeted. The idea that Devin Williams got the same number of years and just $18 million less than Edwin Diaz, and of course deferrals might make it technically less than that, is crazy to me. If you would have told me before the season, the offseason, that those are the two contracts that those two guys were going to sign. And again, I didn't hate the Devin Williams number. I just, like you, was surprised Diaz didn't get a fourth or fifth year, and that the number was 69 with some deferrals. But let's talk about Diaz, the pitcher.
Sure.
I totally agree with and understand the sentiment of please stop paying relievers. Is it fair to say that if you're going to pay a reliever, that Edwin Diaz is the guy that you should pay?
Of course, yeah. I will say, we're getting into the YouTube land of like, I'm realizing you just need to like put punchy things there, yes, regardless of whether they actually make any sense as you go through the video. So it's like I'm just trying to like get you in there, and then hopefully you just enjoy my analysis and hang around and realize that the title and the thumbnail are just my way of trying to stroke some flames on the internet here. But yeah, I mean, I think Diaz is an incredible pitcher. Listen, the big thing that jumps out to me, like, it's a really consolidated mix. He throws two pitches. They're both kind of tight in terms of their movement separation, but he does a really good job missing bats in zone, especially on his four-seam fastball. I think the league average zone miss rate, so how often a ball is swung at in the zone, how often do you miss it? The league average is around like 18%. Most good relievers are in like the low 20s, say 20 to 25%. Diaz is way up at about 33%, I believe. That to me jumps out. I think that this is the reason you got him. The Dodgers really like quality fastballs that miss bats. We've seen this continually in terms of how they prioritize pitching in the minor leagues, the guys they target in the majors, how they deploy some of their starting pitchers. Evan Sheehan, I'm thinking of River Ryan. All these guys have really strong four-seam shapes from a model standpoint. And I think that lines up with Diaz. Now, I'm not saying that, that's the only reason they got him. I think he's also just performed incredibly well and been one of the best relievers in baseball. I like the fact that his slider is pretty platoon neutral. A lot of the time with righties who throw larger, like sweeping breaking balls, I think like Blake Trinan's a good example. They'll have some issues versus offhand hitters. So Trinan's always had, up and down spurts with left-handed hitters. Diaz, because his slider's tighter, will work versus either-handedness. And he's shown that historically through his career that he can get lefties and righties out. I mean, this is the guy who can save 40, 45 games, 50 games in a season. I don't think that's outside the range of possibilities. He's one of the best relievers in baseball, if not the best reliever. And yeah, I don't think this was a crazy deal, especially thinking from the Dodgers standpoint of how they're willing to allocate and defer money. Like,
Yeah.
if you're trying to make your team better, they ran into bullpen issues last year. They gave up a ton of barrels, and Diaz is the guy that will not give up barrels. So
Yeah.
I think it's a good signing. It makes a lot of sense for them.
Everybody is going to deal with age and the drop off at some point.
Sure.
To me, when I look at Edwin Diaz, it's a 3-year deal, which is obviously better than a 5-year deal. But am I crazy for thinking a guy that is as reliant on a secondary pitch like his slider might be to some degree less immune to the age cliff that is going to come? Because his fastball isn't, I mean, it seems like it's ticking down a little bit. I expect that I will only continue. The fact that he throws a slider 50% of the time to me feels like a little bit of a hedge against this aging poorly. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I think that aging is tough to predict, especially with relievers. I mean, think of it from the sample perspective. This is why I think a lot of teams will just bet on like the raw underlying data. Like Tanner Scott's a good example. We're going to talk about him in a second, but he had like a 4 or 5 plus ERA. His underlying stats suggested he was like a high 3s guy. That separation in terms of like the performance you have on field versus what you're expected to do based off the pitcher's ability to control ball and play, his ability to strike out, not walk guys. Like a lot of the time, that variance doesn't have enough time as a reliever to close. Starting pitchers are throwing 150 plus innings. Yeah. Relievers are thrown between, let's say 55 and 65. So, it takes like 3 years of sample for a reliever to get to the point where you're like, okay, I got one starter season out of this guy. And even in the sample of starter seasons, we're still trying to figure out some of the underlying stuff. So there's just so much variance in relievers that you really need large sample to be confident that a guy is good. And I think we got that with Diaz, and I think we got that with Devin Williams, where you have, probably close to 300 innings, 200 innings of these guys being very good if you just average out their stats. And that's what I think teams are going off of. And the reason that these guys are getting so much money, very obvious, right? Track record of success is what I'm talking about here. But I think these bets have more strength in terms of their calculation than like, I like Kyle Finnegan, but he's done it for like half a season, and his usage changed. Like these peripheral guys who kind of pop onto the scene. Luke Weaver's a good example, really good 24, backed up in 25. He doesn't really have a track record of success, Like I think the underlying stats there on some of these guys that are in that like $10 to $15 million window from a reliever standpoint are just really hard. Like the variance on your projection is far wider to me than a guy like Diaz or Williams. And you have to pay for that. And there's just so few teams in baseball that are willing to pay for it. I almost wonder whether the Dodgers got like a subtle deal here on Diaz, just because there's probably like, maybe they were willing to go 4 for whatever and beat the Tanner Scott contract on years and dollars. And maybe they didn't need to. Maybe the other offers were in that 3 window. It didn't seem like the Mets got close to what the Dodgers were offering. So who knows? Maybe the Dodgers had another like 10 to 15 mil they were willing to kind of push up on Diaz relative to the value they thought he had. And maybe internally they actually think they got a deal on him, which could be the case.
Yeah, there's been some rumors that like the Braves may have offered him 5 years, but obviously not at the AAV. Then there's this report that like he basically took this deal to the Mets and said, "What do you think?" And they said, "Well, we would negotiate off of that." And then he took it to the Dodgers and they were like, "Sounds great," Yeah. And it's like in fantasy, right? If you make a trade and it gets accepted immediately, you got to step back and be like, "Well, hold on a second. I probably could have gotten more out of this." But honestly, like if this would have been 3 for 75, like I don't think many people would have blinked at this. They would have just said the same thing, which is, wow, at least you didn't have to go 4 or 5 years on Diaz.
It's a great point. Yeah, I forgot about the Braves angle there. That's a good point. Like they push up the years, and maybe again, like there's that old the Space Jam water bottle idea with the Dodgers, where like I get that the public gives guys flack for joining the team that is back to back the World Series, but like I don't know. Like I would want to go there too, man. If I'm trying to win, like there's really no other way around it. So like. You have their willingness to push up and defer money, jump over AAV intervals, probably relative to what their models say internally. And then you also have the interest of team players, really good players just wanting to go there. So you have this synergy of a lot, like sure, you might've gone to the Braves, but like the Braves even going to make the playoffs next year. Like they probably are a coin flip or a little bit better, like Diaz wants to pitch in the World Series. He wants to win a chip. I don't blame him at all for going to the Dodgers, especially on the short-term money that he got. He could probably, if he pitches, if 2 of the next 3 years of him are the best reliever in baseball, or even like top 3, he could go back into the market and get paid again. Like we've seen Rafael Iglesias and some of these other guys pitch well into their late 30s and be really successful. And there's nothing about Diaz that suggests that's not possible for him. So this is a good deal for the Dodgers. Maybe it's also a good deal for Diaz when he hits free agency again, when he's even older.
Totally. The one thing that puts a wet blanket on all of the Edwin Diaz stuff in my mind is a guy that we've mentioned a couple of times, which is Tanner Scott. I was saying some of the same things about Tanner Scott 12 months ago that I now find myself saying with Edwin Diaz. And, you look back and the track record, to your point, isn't quite as long, but it wasn't short either. It's not like this guy had like one pop-up fluky season and then you paid for it. So you mentioned some of the underlying stuff for Tanner Scott was definitely not peak Tanner Scott, but it wasn't as bad as the sort of external numbers, on the surface numbers suggested in 2025 either. So is there reason for optimism and a bounce back when it comes to Tanner Scott for the Dodgers?
I think there is, even if it's just because he's in the Dodgers organization and they're obviously looking at certain things there, trying to tweak stuff. You know, the weird thing for me, and the reason the underlying stats think he'll just bounce back, is primarily because he's gave up a bunch of home runs and his barrel rate jumped. And if you're trying to project that out going forward, you don't expect it to hang around like the 9% that it did this season, which is, you know, kind of averages for a starting pitcher, below average for a reliever. You know, he was sub 5%, I believe, in the last couple seasons prior to last year. So, you know, you just average it out and say he gets back to like a 6% barrel rate. You know, the homers come down. All of a sudden, he's like a mid-threes ERA reliever, which is not entirely what you guys paid for, but is still really good. There's also like the subtle angles here around him saying he was throwing too many strikes, which was kind of this hot take I think I threw on this podcast a while back. So I was really happy when he then said it because it made a lot of sense to me. I just think he was maybe in zone a little bit too much. Yeah. And then that took away the effectiveness of him getting into deep 2 strike counts. I think I had a stat here. What did I have? 2 strike righty performance. So swinging strike rate and 2 strike righty at bats last year was 12%. You go back to the prior season, 24, it was 18%. That's a massive, massive drop off on his ability to miss bats 2K. And a lot of guys as relievers, like that's probably the easy part, is like getting to 2 strikes and then putting a guy away. Like the reason you're a reliever is probably because you have big stuff. And in those situations, hitters are probably geared for more swing, therefore more chase. But it's weird to me that Scott didn't achieve that. A lot of the times relievers run into issues in early count spots where it's like, I just can't get into the 2 strike spots to throw my really good pitches. So the Dodgers got to be thinking about this. There was also he threw 2 sinkers last year. In July, randomly, I noticed. I was looking through some data and like I watched him. One of them, he like completely sprayed arm side up, but another one was like dead middle and the hitter swung directly through it. So maybe they were playing with some stuff, you know, like there's things here that I could see it working. And if this means he becomes more of like a lefty guy for you, where it's like Diaz is clearly the 9th, Scott becomes like a 7-8 guy, depending on pocket of the lineup. Maybe he throws more sinker, just becomes like a lefty demon. And I could see that working as well. Again, like it's going to be hard for him to square the value of this contract right now, for sure. But it's the sunk cost, right? Like you paid him it. So now it's a matter of like getting him to as good as you could possibly imagine. There's a chance he's back to as good as being 24, but the easy thing here is probably just to split 24 and 25 or average them together and say he's like a 3-4 ERA reliever, which is good, you know, and I think he could be really effective and he's got a spot on this team. So bounce back for sure. Bounce back to being better than Edwin Diaz. I'd put skepticism on that just because, again, of the reliever variance and track record is like you run into these seasons and he just didn't have enough time to correct it.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear what Dave Roberts and Andrew Friedman and Brandon Gomes have been saying about Tanner Scott this offseason, because it's exactly what you would expect them to say. Like Dave Roberts kind of hinting like, well, I think he was a little more injured than he let on and was playing through some things people didn't know about. And like, oh, I definitely expect a bounce back. And it's like, well, yeah, of course you're saying that. Like that's a very convenient like explanation. It might be true, or it might just be them like wishfully thinking out loud.
Yeah, it's a tough one because he threw a lot of innings too. So, and the Dodgers usually very, like, again, to this point we're talking about, they're playing for October. Like their baseline wins as a team from a projection standpoint is 94. Like they're in the playoffs, even if they run into like a really bad outcome as a team. You know, if they win 88 games, they're probably still in the playoffs, and that's a bad season for the Dodgers. So I'm a little bit, I don't want to call Dave Roberts out there, of course not, but like, yeah, it's a little odd to me. Like the team that has been rumored to delay guys on the IL because they understand they just want the dude healthy in October. You know, you got a light hamstring, chill out, hit the IL, maybe miss more than an extra start or 2. Like, I don't know why they wouldn't then have IL'd him for an extended period of time and been like, you just got to fix this and then come back, because we really only care about your performance in October. But perhaps the other angle of that is the bullpen was underperforming so hard, they kind of like needed him. So they were like, listen, we usually would IL a guy like you in this situation with whatever injury Roberts is speculating, but we can't because we don't really have any other options. So you're just going to have to grin and bear it. That's very not Dodgersy, in my opinion, in terms of how they managed injuries in the past, but totally in the realm of possibility here. It is funny to hear that from Roberts, though. I didn't see that.
Well, and in the micro level, like I can think of a handful of times where he was so bad one night that he just wanted the ball the next night to go back out there. So I think some of it was he was so bad that he was like, I need to keep pitching. You need to keep putting me out there because I just want to grab the baseball and feel a little bit. They did give him like 3 weeks off, like very end, kind of like end of July into early August. But then he comes back, he's just as bad. Then he gets like this weird thing in the postseason, then he's gone, and you just don't hear from him again. So very strange circumstances around Tanner Scott. But to your point, they're paying him, $18 million a year for 3 more years, and so hopefully for the Dodgers, there's some more value in there. Last guy I wanted to ask you about is Roki Sasaki. Speaking of takes that you had on this podcast, last year when we talked Roki Sasaki, he said, I wonder if he's more of a reliever than a starter, at least in the short term. People didn't like that take. You proved to be very right on that one, as he struggled mightily as a starter. Then they try him as a reliever in the postseason. He has some success. I know within the Dodgers kind of content world, there are some people who look at what Sasaki did as a reliever and kind of wonder aloud was he just getting a little bit lucky? Like, was there actually anything noticeably changed? Or was this a guy who got some pretty good, fortunate, batted ball luck and just ended up kind of in the right place, right time? Or was there something tangibly different about him? I'm curious to get your thoughts on, like, what did you see in the postseason, and does it change anything about your overall perception of Roki Sasaki?
Yeah, that's the thing that jumped out to me. And looking, like, if you just look at, like, his K-minus walk was like 2%. He struck out basically as many batters as he walked in October, which isn't particularly good. That's like, again, getting back to this idea of like, well, what are you trying to bet on if you're trying to predict reliever performance? A lot of the time it's literally just K and walk, and you're not even really looking at batted ball quality too much, just because it's, again, we're working with small samples for the most part with the relievers a lot of the time. So yeah, I mean, the velo jumped back up. I wrote that he started throwing a cutter. He flipped his slider. He had that like weird sweeper thing that I just didn't think was particularly good. And maybe the Dodgers kind of slow rolled how they wanted to deploy him, or maybe he was working through other things and that was just down the list. But he threw it at AAA right before he came back up. And the shape was better than anything he'd thrown from a breaking ball, glove side standpoint, in my opinion. He was just ripping the heck out of it, which for his kind of release and the kind of fastball shape he creates is probably the way to approach him having some kind of righty weapon. So I think that's kind of the key to 2026 for me with him, is like, he can't survive with a four-seam to split as a starting pitcher. Heck no. Like, there's no way he's going to do. He's not Kevin Gossman. He doesn't have the feel, I don't think. So it's like, if he's going to be a starter, then he's got to throw this sinker more to righties a lot, even if the shape isn't great. And it's literally just like a differential of where he's going to throw it. Like, he could go in because the miss is going to be more in with the sinker to righties, and then maybe tries to keep the four-seam away. And then I think he's got to throw his cutter more. So like, it gets to this larger theme that I've talked about on my YouTube channel and other places. Is just starting pitchers now have large mixes, and it's really hard for me to project him as a starting pitcher. And I'll hang by the fact that I think he's a reliever. Now, I haven't looked totally at like the Dodgers and how they're breaking out all their starting pitchers next year and such. Like, if there's even room, or like maybe it's 110 innings and it's some hybrid role between the pen and starter, or it's like we stretch them. Of course, all relievers that have the chance of being starters are stretched in spring. So maybe it's like, oh, the entire spring, it's like he's being stretched. We start him as a starter, and then we recalibrate at the end of March. So the team tone is just going to be he's a starting pitcher, and then you get to end of March, and it's like, yeah, spring results weren't great. Cutter looks fine. Sinker looks fine, but we still don't think he's a starter. He'll go back into the pen, or it'll be long relief. We'll keep him stretched out in case they run into an early injury. So there's a lot of ways that I can see the Dodgers approaching this that is like, of course he's a starter. Of course he's a starter. And then it's purely just from the standpoint of trying to protect, basically an insurance policy against the better starting pitchers in the rotation. I personally just think his mix is more suited for a reliever long-term. And again, given the dollars you guys paid him, which is not much because he's on the minimum and such, I think it's totally fine. Like, I get he came over with these massive expectations, and I don't think we're going to hit those at this point. He's just kind of shown nothing in the majors that suggests he's going to be a lights-out starter, turning out lineups over. And I think that's fine. I think it's cool if he's just a really good reliever. You know, and I get that there was some hesitancy on how good he was in October last year, but I'm going to defer to the Dodgers here, and knowing that they need to expand the mix, and he becomes like a 4-pitch reliever, be fun. Like, mixes them some sinkers to righties, cutters to lefties, uses that cutter maybe a little bit to righties as well. The righty problem is really what you're trying to figure out with him, because the split works really well to lefties. So there's a lot of iterations here. My prediction is that you're just going to hear all spring he's a starter, and then when you're to use, for lack of a better phrase, like when your nuts are on the table, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, let's see if they actually want to start him in a game. And I'm a little bit skeptical that they're A, going to do that, or B, they're going to have success with it.
Yeah. And we keep saying, like, not only all of what you just said, but he's going to have to jump a few guys in line, whether it's River Ryan, Gavin Stone, who knows what he's like coming back from shoulder injury, obviously Emmett Sheehan. And then depending on what they do with Justin Robleski, depending on what they do with Ben Kasparius, Jackson Ferris, who hasn't even made his major league debut. Like, you have all these other guys who are going to be fighting for the same, like, once every 6 days start opportunity that the Dodgers starting rotation at the major league level offers you. I think it's going to be competitive. And whereas in other teams, he might get a long runway to try some things out at the major league level to make 20 starts and then see what happens. Unfortunately, if you're a young guy in the Dodgers organization, you don't get that. Like, Alex Freeland would have been probably the everyday starter for like 2/3 of Major League Baseball last year at some point. Ha-Seong Kim would be getting reps somewhere. Like, these guys, Dalton Rushing for sure. And yet the Dodgers, they're like, hey, that's nice that you're like highly ranked and you might be good someday. But unless you're like definitely really good right now or we're injured, sorry, you know? And that's a tough spot for a young guy. But I think Roki Sasaki's just in that mix.
And that lines them up, I think, in a lot of situations for trades for like more premier talent, which is why I understand the Skubal rumors and these other things. It's just, I mean, if I'm the Tigers and I'm like, okay, how do we pitch this as like we're giving up Skubal, but we're getting immediate talent that can impact us? Then you go to a Rushing, you go to a Freeland, you go to any of these other guys that you could put in the show right now, and it'll probably be good. And the Dodgers have surplus of those guys because they're hunting. The risk tolerance is just higher from an acquisition standpoint on the minor league side, amateur circuit specifically. And I think this pulls down some of their minor league stats, but they just operate differently than other teams given the finances they're able to pull. And I think that context is really important. There's a lot of people in the industry now that are like, ooh, I don't think the Dodgers are that great at pitching development anymore. Like, they had the highest walk rate in all the minor leagues last year. And like, sure, that's fair. But it's also fair to contextualize it and say, yeah, they're drafting massive stuff. They still have top 1 or 2 in four-seam velo and really up there in slider velo. They're drafting stuff, don't really care about the command. They're trying to hit home runs here. You know what I mean? They're trying to get these crazy percentile outcomes where you get a River Ryan and then he converts into a starter and it's unbelievable. Like, they don't really care about the 4th starter in a rotation being, they're not going to draft those guys. Other teams like the Guardians and others that aren't going to pay guys in free agency kind of have to because you need depth, but the Dodgers aren't. And I think that changes what is reflected in the minor league stats they produce a lot of the time and skews some of the public perception around how they're perceived as like an organization from a development standpoint.
Landon Knack is a guy I always think of where I just feel so bad that he's stuck in the Dodgers organization because it's just like a guy who it's like 2/3 of the league values Landon Knack, and the Dodgers, it's like, we're not really interested in like number 4.5 starters. Landon, we know you could go throw 180 innings. You could probably give us an ERA that's like, in the low 4s and be like competitive day in and day out. But like, unless you have the potential to be like a number 2 starter, hop in line and hang out in Oklahoma City, unfortunately. So I think it's a great point by you. The Dodgers just like, we're just going to throw 12 darts. And as long as we hit 2 of them, then we're going to be net positive for what we're looking for. So
absolutely. 100%.
Love it. Well, that is Lance Brozdowski. You can check him out at Lance Bros on social media. Tell people about the YouTube page. Tell people what you got going on there.
Yeah, search my name on YouTube. Been growing my channel over the last year or so, trying to do my best. I usually post like once a week. It's, I'd say it's nerdy, but I'm trying to make it as like accessible as possible. I'm trying to differentiate more on the angle of like, I'd hope my analysis is not redundant relative to a lot of the other analysis you probably watch if you're watching this channel, for example, Dodger Heads, which does great stuff. So also the Substack, which is like, if you're like, I can't get enough of Lance being an absolute nerd, that is like the deep of the deep. That's like literally my personal notes on guys. And I understand that's a very small audience. So stick to the social, stick to the YouTube. And then if you really get in the weeds with me, hop to the Substack.
Yeah, and you'll see him on Watch Marquee if you're ever watching some Cubs content. Pops up on MLB Network when you're maybe not expecting it. So Lance is all over the place, and rightfully so. Lance, thank you for your time. Thanks for the analysis, and we appreciate you. We'll have you back on. Oh, when the Dodgers make the next massive move for a starting pitcher, a relief pitcher, or something, we'll make sure to reach back out.
Let's do it. Awesome. Good seeing you, Jeff.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everybody. This is Dodger Heads presented by DodgerBlue.com. Enjoy the rest of your day. As always, go Dodgers. And yes, still